Well, guys, I'm sick. I wasn't going to record because of this, but then I realized now my voice is just perfect for scary stories. I guess this is just more proof that I'm not an AI. Or actually, you never know. Maybe I just added a sick filter to my AI voice. All jokes aside, we have a very creepy story to read today that ended up being one of my favorites of all time. And while I'm reading today, I'm going to be tending to my wheat farm in Minecraft. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. The first story today is from r/nosleep from user Mr. Outlaw. A few weeks ago, I agreed to enter an experimental haunted house. Part 1. The most terrifying thing you'll ever experience. Do you dare? That was the exact phrase that had been printed onto the flyer. I had stumbled out of a bar one night, preparing to walk back to my apartment when I noticed it. The flyer had been stapled to a telephone pole, nearly buried beneath several others. Halloween was coming up, so I had already seen plenty of advertisements for various kinds of haunted houses. But this one stood out, largely due to how different it looked from the rest. I guess you could have called it a bare-bones design, other than the slogan, which was in large, bold letters. The only thing that had been printed on there was an email address near the bottom. Strange, but I liked it. It intrigued me. I took a picture of it, and once I got home, I sent an email stating that I'd seen the flyer and was curious as to what this was all about. They got back to me the next morning. Hey there, glad we've caught your interest. We're a new startup company that aims to deliver revolutionary horror experiences. Think about the classic haunted house you'd find at fairs or in your local community. They're fun for the family, a good option for a first date, but have you ever actually been scared by one of these? What we've developed here transcends that. What we're offering is an opportunity to experience true primal fear. Are you brave enough to find out what we have in store? How are you going to shit on the very concept of a haunted house when that's exactly what you are marketing? But as skeptical as I was, I still reckon that it could be something worth checking out. I hadn't been to a haunted house in a while. Maybe they really did have a unique spin on it. I replied stating that I was indeed brave enough to check it out, that I'd like to know more about what they were offering. This time they got back to me within the hour, providing a more in-depth explanation. Essentially, their twist on the conventional haunted house was that it wouldn't take place in a house at all. Not some makeshift DIY thing either. They were going to set it up in an abandoned building near the edge of the city. But there was another layer to it, because apparently nobody knew what the building had actually been used for, why it existed at all. There were even rumors that it just appeared one day out of thin air, that it wasn't even man-made. I wasn't sure what that was supposed to mean, but it was pretty decent marketing. That much I couldn't deny, but things have gotten expensive these days and it's left me with a pretty tight budget. And with what sounded like such an elaborate setup, I had my doubts that I'd be able to afford the entrance fee. I brought this up to them in my next email, and they told me that it wouldn't be a problem, that I wouldn't actually need to fork up any cash at all because they'd be the ones compensating me. $400 cash, to be dispersed at the end. Because technically the project was still in its developmental phase, that this was only going to serve as a test run, an experiment. They assured me that they had implemented rigid safety protocols, that they themselves have gone through it several times and could say with confidence that there was no risk of anybody getting hurt. At this point, I honestly couldn't believe my luck, because quite frankly, the money would have been real nice. I suppose that I was ecstatic enough that I had stopped analyzing the situation through a critical lens, but I don't know. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have questioned things more? Be honest with yourself. I sent them a reply telling them I was in, to go ahead and tell me exactly what I needed to do. Their reply was short, to the point, just a set of coordinates along with a time and date, and also a note stating that they'd cover any travel expenses so long as we kept our receipts. 9 a.m. on October 26th. I put the coordinates into Google and it turned up a 35-minute drive out to an area that I'd never been before. Looked like some country road with a forest on one side and a large cornfield on the other. But I didn't see a building, which bothered me for reasons that I couldn't really comprehend at the time. Just not nearly enough to dissuade me altogether. I asked them if I could bring somebody along, and they told me that I could, but that they only had one spot left and it was first come, first serve. I considered asking my girlfriend Luna, but realized that the idea of driving out to some abandoned road to enter some sketchy building might not be terribly appealing to her. So then I thought about who might really need the money, and it was an obvious choice. My friend Josh. Met him in college, and we'd been good friends ever since. It had been nearly 6 years since we graduated, and I don't think he's ever worked at the same company for longer than 3 months. And over the past few years, I don't think he's been working at all. You know those reels where the caption's like, your unemployed friend on a Tuesday afternoon, and it's some guy feeding a llama in a jungle or something? That's him. He has no car, lives in a shitbox studio with no furniture. How he even has the money to pay for rent or food, I couldn't begin to guess. Savings, he tells me, whatever that means. Predictably, Josh seemed pretty enthused by the idea when I brought it up. He almost sounded relieved. On the morning of the 26th, I picked him up and we drove all the way out there. Based on the story so far, you may be under the impression that I'm not the brightest, but I'm not a complete idiot either. I let Luna know exactly where I was going, told her that if I wasn't picking up my phone at around noon, then something might be up. We arrived at the coordinates at around 8:40. It really was just a random spot on the road. There was a small clearing in the forest where a few cars were already parked, so I followed suit and backed my Nissan into it. After parking, we got out. The air was cold and crisp and the skies above were a deep blue. We looked around at the 4 people who were already there. One of them was a younger girl, maybe in her late teens or early 20s, wearing a jacket with the hood pulled up, athletic leggings, and sneakers. She was sitting on a tree stump with her arms crossed. And then there was a couple that appeared to be in their 30s, sitting on the hood of their car. They both seemed to be mildly annoyed, and I couldn't tell if it was because of each other or if they were actively regretting their decision to be there. Finally, there was a guy that could have been in his early or mid-20s, tall and lean with sharp features, his hair bleached and buzzed close to the scalp, a tattoo of what appeared to be a tiger on his neck. He was dressed in what I can only describe as tactical streetwear. And he was the only one that acknowledged our existence. He walked over to us with this huge grin on his face and shook both of our hands. This guy sounds nice. He introduced himself as Ki-jun, told us that he was visiting from Korea for the week. We asked him why he'd chosen to come here out of all places, since our city was far from being anything close to a tourist destination. He explained that this haunted house was actually an urban legend of sorts, but one that had more credibility than most others, because there were actual, official police reports detailing cases where people had gone missing after entering the place, ones that had since been scrubbed from public records. I asked if he'd actually read these reports himself. He said that he hadn't, that they were pretty hard to find, but that he was really into this sort of thing. The weird, the strange, the dangerous. So he'd done as much research as he could and found some contacts in America who clued him on this place. And now he was here. I wasn't sure whether I really believed him. I looked at Josh and could tell he was feeling something similar. That Ki-jun might have been somebody hired by the company and given a script to try and freak us out. And if that had been the case, it was kind of working right then. But before we could ask him anything else, another vehicle pulled up. A black Mustang, new and shiny. It parked against the hill leading down to the clearing before 2 young guys climbed out of it, both wearing college football jerseys. They both appeared to be drunk, perhaps also high on coke. They were laughing, stumbling over their feet as they made their way toward us. They told us that their names were Chad and Harrison, and we spent a painful few minutes trying to have a conversation with them before somebody walked out of the forest. A sharp-looking guy in a suit, maybe early 30s, looked like he belonged in a boardroom somewhere. Thinking about it now, I don't think I actually heard or saw him coming out of the woods. He just sort of appeared. He introduced himself as Sinclair, the CEO of the startup. He told us how nice it was to meet everyone and that he'd been the one guiding us over to the building. Ki-jun raised a hand, asked him what the actual name of the startup was. Sinclair smiled, told him that it was still a work in progress, that he wasn't at liberty to divulge much in the way of details. After he'd answered, Ki-jun looked over at us and raised his eyebrows, as if to signal, Hey, isn't that weird? And it was. The whole thing was extremely bizarre, and only now I was starting to realize it. At the same time, I figured that maybe it was all part of the show, that it was meant to be as immersive as possible, and in that case, they were doing a hell of a job. I looked around at the others. Chad and Harrison seemed too drunk and coked out to really give a shit. The couple appeared to be quietly arguing with each other, which kept them preoccupied. From eavesdropping in on their conversation, I learned that their names were Liam and Deb. The girl in the jacket was stone-faced, staring blankly ahead. It was hard to tell what she was thinking, and then of course there was Kijun. I already love Chad and Harrison. Like, you can tell. Chad and Harrison had some beers, did some coke, pulled up in the Mustang, and they're just here. They're purely running on vibes right now. Anyways, we love Chad and Harrison. Sinclair asked if there were any more questions, and Josh raised a hand. Asked why we hadn't just met at the building directly. Sinclair told him that there were no roads leading to it, that it would be difficult to find without a guide who knew exactly where they were going. Josh asked what that was supposed to mean. Sinclair told him that we'd all find out soon enough. He told everybody to come with him before turning around and walking into the forest. We all hesitated for a moment before following. We walked along a rough trail for about a half hour before arriving at a huge, unnatural-looking clearing. And there it was, an actual building in the middle of the woods. It was about the size of a small corporate office, painted dark gray, 3 stories tall. The strangest thing about it is that it didn't even look terribly dilapidated. Not that it looked brand new or anything. Sections of the paint had started to peel and a few of the windows were cracked, but it really didn't seem like it had been abandoned for long. It looked like it could have been functional just a few years prior. But functioning is what? What the hell was it doing out here? Well, this is it, Sinclair said. We all stared at him. For a while, nobody said a word. Even the cocaine bros had been rendered silent. Sorry. So this is something you guys built? Liam asked him. I mean, are you really sure it's safe? Sinclair looked at him. I can assure you that we've done our due diligence and that there's absolutely nothing to be worried about, he said. We've cleared all the debris, accounted for any electrical hazards, unstable floors, everything. Nothing to worry about. Liam didn't seem so convinced, but then Deb nudged him. This was your idea, she whispered through gritted teeth, so relax. She paused, took another look at the building. Besides, this might be interesting. Liam rolled his eyes, then looked back at Sinclair. You know if anything goes wrong, there's going to be hell to pay. I haven't signed any waivers yet, and I'm not going to. Sinclair put his hands up in a playful, defensive gesture. I hear you, I understand, but there's really nothing to worry about. Nothing to sign, that's how much we trust it. But you didn't answer my first question, Liam continued. Did you guys build this? It looks awfully expensive for what you're trying to do here. We did not build it, Sinclair told him. As expressed in prior communications, we don't know who built this place. We don't know where it came from. Liam scoffed. So is this still part of the act, or are you being serious? I can't tell anymore. Sinclair stared at him. We really don't know. Chad and Harrison began laughing. This is some freaky ass shit, I heard one of them say. Any more questions or concerns? Sinclair asked. Silence followed. Sinclair's smile returned, and he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. He opened it up, revealing a stack of $100 bills. As stated, your compensation will come out to $400. $200 up front, and then the other $200 once we've finished everything up, so please form a line. We did just that, each taking our promised amount. I could see Josh's eyes lighting up as his fingers touched the cash. Once everybody had gotten their money, Sinclair led us over to one of the building's entrances. It'll be a simple process, he told us. Go inside, follow the red arrows that have been taped to the walls until you've reached the exit. It should take around 30 minutes in total. I'll be waiting at the end. With that, he walked off to the side and gestured for us to enter. I'd be lying if I said my expectations hadn't been set high at this point. The entire build-up had been unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. My heart was beating heavy. I was excited. Inside, it just looked like any bog standard office. Though the harsh incandescent light did give it an eerie, liminal vibe, I suppose that was the angle they were going for. No cobwebs, no pots of boiling blood, no skeletons hiding underneath floorboards waiting to jump out and grab your ankles. Just an empty building, but there was something strange about it, a subtle feeling. It wasn't just the fact that it was deep inside a forest, there was something else. Something hard to identify. Something uncomfortable. Oh my gosh, side note guys, is this the Backrooms? I've been waiting to read a backroom story. I haven't come across one on Reddit yet in my search, but oh my gosh, there's no way this is a backroom story. Let's continue. I reckon everybody else started feeling it as well, because nobody was saying a word, but we sucked it up and began following the tape down the first corridor. It stretched on for a good bit before we turned into another one, and then another. After traversing through several more identical-looking corridors, we realized what was wrong with the place. The layout didn't make any sense, just a bunch of hallways with no actual rooms. It was almost disorienting. And this is the point where Chad told us that he was heading back, that he wouldn't go any further. We turned to look at him. He'd already started lagging well behind the rest of the group, his face painted with a pretty earnest expression of terror. Harrison asked him what was wrong. He looked at the floor, then at the walls, and then back at us. He shook his head. "I'm not going any further," he repeated. Before we could say anything else, he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner. "Hey man," Harrison called after him, "what the hell are you doing?" He then shook his head. "The hell's his problem?" he muttered to himself. "Aren't you going to go after him?" Kijun asked. Harrison shook his head. "Screw that. I need the money." We ventured on. After 5 or 6 or maybe 10 more corridors, I was starting to get the itch to turn back as well. Wasn't there even any explicit threat? Just this constant, relentless feeling of what the hell is going on. I asked Kijun what he thought about it, but he didn't answer. Instead, he seemed to be fixated on one of the walls. After a while, I realized why. There was no tape on either of the walls. I couldn't recall a point where I'd consciously took stock of the fact that the arrows were no longer there. I guess we just hadn't been paying attention. I looked back down the corridor we'd just walked through and saw that there was no tape behind us either. Had we just been moving around aimlessly, and for how long? Why hadn't we noticed? "Alright, there's no way that we're lost in here," Liam declared. The building wasn't that big from the outside. "I don't like this," Deb said to him. "Let's get the hell out of here." "Oh, now you want to leave. Are you going to tell me you want to stay?" He thought about it for a moment and then shook his head. "Hell no." They turned around, beginning to walk away. "Hey, that's not the right direction," Kijun called after them. Josh looked at him. "What are you talking about? That's where we came from." Kijun stared back at him. "Are you sure?" I looked around and tried to figure it out for myself, and I realized I wasn't sure. Without the arrows, everything kinda looked the same, but I told myself that wasn't a problem. Walk around enough and eventually we'll make it out, right? But for whatever reason, I couldn't seem to convince myself that this was the case. "You guys are overreacting," Harrison told us. "We came from there." He pointed behind us. "So we're obviously supposed to go there." He then pointed ahead. His voice was loud, but there wasn't much confidence behind it. But at the same time, we couldn't really argue with him. We had to go somewhere. So we walked on. More and more corridors. Soon, 15 more minutes had passed, and still no signs of an exit, or a room, or even a dead end. Was it possible that we were just continuously traversing through a loop? I started keeping track of the turns we were taking. Left, left, right, left, 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 right, right. Clearly we weren't. I took out my phone to find that the signal was dead. I asked around, and so was everybody else's. 10 more minutes, and now the panic had turned into one hell of a thing. The space was starting to feel claustrophobic, almost threatening. Harrison had started jogging ahead, and we struggled to keep up with him. I looked over at Kijun, seeing that the excitement once present in his face had been drained almost completely away, replaced with his sense of cautious bewilderment. After what must have been our 100th turn, there finally came a change in scenery. A single window, sitting at the end of yet another corridor. It was the first window that we'd seen the entire time that we'd been in there, so it was quite the jarring visual. But it was also a potential way out. We began walking towards it when the girl in the jacket told us not to, that we needed to turn around and get away from it as soon as possible. It was the first time that we'd even heard her speak. Up until that point, she'd just been following silently along. We weren't entirely sure what her deal was, but I suppose we had been too preoccupied to ask. Harrison looked at her. What the hell are you talking about? We shouldn't go near any windows, she told him. We should turn around. Or what? What's going to happen? I don't know exactly, she said, but probably nothing good. Harrison shook his head. Yeah, screw that, and screw the money. I'm getting out of here. He marched towards the window, with Josh and Kijun following close behind. I stayed back and asked the girl how she knew that going near the window would be dangerous. She told me it was a long story, that she'd explain it later, but for now, we really needed to leave. If they aren't going to listen to me, then go over there and convince them, she said to me. If we don't leave soon, then I'm going on my own. That window is not a way out. I could see her expression crack, a quiver in her lip. She was almost pleading. If she wasn't dead serious, then she was one hell of an actor. I asked her if she was aware of something that we weren't, if she knew something that we didn't. We don't have time for me to explain it to all of you, she said. We need to leave. I really didn't want to believe her. I wanted to believe that window was really a way out, and in that moment, I managed to convince myself that her words were just fear manifesting into paranoia. I turned away from her and walked over to the window. The others were all huddled up against it, and I asked them what they were seeing. Josh turned around. He looked both confused and horrified. Take a look. He made some space for me, and I squeezed in, and at first, it felt like my brain was short-circuiting. Outside, there were no trees, no brush, just a wide-open field blanketed by heavy fog, definitely not the forest we'd come in from. Kijun suggested that maybe it was a painting, but if you took a good look at it for more than a few seconds, you'd realize that it definitely wasn't. The mist was moving, slowly rolling forward, wind blowing through the grass. Harrison suddenly backed up, delivered a hard kick to the glass. It didn't crack. It didn't even shake. It just made a dull, thudding noise, as if it were solid concrete disguised as a window. He shook his head, tried kicking it again, and then again, and again. But then he stopped, started squinting at something through the glass. We asked him what he was seeing. He told us to take a look for ourselves. At first, the fog made it difficult to tell exactly what it was. Just some vague shape in the distance, getting steadily closer. So we all stood still and just stared at it. I guess we were too shocked to really do anything else, but soon it was close enough that we could tell it was human-shaped. A man, sprinting right toward us. He was naked and his skin appeared to be burnt. He had long, wild hair that was sticking out at odd angles. We began to back away. I turned around and saw that the girl was already gone. The man continued barreling towards us as soon as we could make out some of his more peculiar features, like the fact that his arms were so long that his fingers were scraping the top of the grass. We didn't wait for him to get any closer, and we turned and ran. As we rounded the first corner, we could hear the glass break, something heavy smacking down onto the floor. We ran faster, though it quickly became clear that Harrison was the fittest among us. He turned around, shouted at us to catch up, but we were unable to. Soon, he was out of sight, leaving us in the dust. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like steel. I just tried to push forward. Something that sounded like a hoarse croaking reverberated through the corridors, accompanied by the sound of dense, uneven footsteps. It was hard to tell exactly how far away they were, but certainly close enough for me to start losing my shit. The three of us turned another corner and then skidded to a stop. There was a door in the wall. The first door we'd actually seen in this place, apart from the entrance. We stared at it as we caught our breath, listening to footsteps and the croaking growing closer. Then we stared at each other, all coming to a mutual understanding. The door likely wasn't going to lead us anywhere we wanted to be, but we couldn't run forever. We opened it and rushed in, slamming it shut behind us. We found ourselves standing in complete darkness. For a while, we didn't move, didn't make a noise. We just held our breaths, listening to the footsteps as they continued to close in on us, praying that they'd run right past. Which thankfully they did, but even after they had long faded away, we remained standing there, still terrified to move. It took a while for us to feel secure enough to move and speak freely. Once we did, we took out our phones and turned on our flashlights, illuminating a room that looked like something ripped straight from some obscure nightmare. The walls and floor appeared to be made out of old, severely rusted metal. We hadn't really taken stock of the smell at first, but now it was heavy, delivering an assault on our senses. The room was no bigger than a standard high school classroom, but it was completely empty. The only thing in there apart from the door we'd entered through being 2 sets of stairs, one leading up and the other leading down. Neither option seemed particularly enticing as we began to argue about what to do next. We first decided to try leaving the room, gambling on the idea that we wouldn't have to run into whatever the hell had broken through the window. But when we tried to open the door, we weren't able to. It had locked itself from the inside. We tried forcing it open by taking turns slamming our shoulders into it, but it never came close to budging. So we settled on going up instead. We began climbing the stairs, and we just kept climbing. It took us far too long to realize what was wrong, because we should have reached the 2nd floor long ago. Even if these stairs went all the way up to the 3rd, we should have been there at that point. The building could not have been more than 30 or 40 feet tall, and we've been walking for over 20 minutes. We also noticed that the air had grown thicker. It was becoming difficult to breathe. We began retreating down the steps, and once again, the stairs wouldn't end. Not after 30 minutes, not after an hour. I could hear Josh starting to hyperventilate, and I tried to calm him down. Eventually, he did. And then we just sat there. We were exhausted, mentally whipped. Kijun's phone was the first to die, and then so did Josh's. Now we were down to one light, and it wouldn't be much longer before we were in the dark. After a while, we could hear footsteps moving up towards us. We stood up, ready to sprint again, when a familiar voice called up to us. "Wait, it's me." I angled my light down the steps, and it revealed the girl in the jacket, but I was too paranoid at this point to fully accept that this wasn't some kind of trick, so I continued to back away. "Don't freak out," she continued. "It's me. It really is." She seemed earnest enough. I asked her where she'd been this entire time. She shook her head. "I don't know, just around, I guess." I asked her what the hell that was even supposed to mean, and why she seemed so relaxed. "Look, I'll tell you, but we need to get out of the stairs first," she told me. "It's dangerous here." I told her to tell us what she knew about this place that we apparently didn't know. That if it might help us escape this place alive, we deserved to know. She took a deep breath, and then she told us that her name was Nadia. Some time ago, her brother Anton had gone into one of these, and he hadn't come back out. I asked her what one of these was supposed to mean. She explained that this place can appear in different locations and can take on different forms. The one that her brother had gone into had been in a different city altogether. He had also been part of a group of 8, and out of those 8, only 3 of them had been seen again. 2 of them had made it all the way to the end, while the 3rd had left very early on. Her brother's girlfriend, Dixie, had been one of the 2 that had made it to the end. "So this place ends?" Josh asked her, hopeful. She nodded. "Eventually it should, according to Dixie. We just have to deal with a lot of shit before it finally does." As she was speaking, I felt a sudden flash of anger. I asked her why the hell she hadn't stopped us from coming in here in the first place. If she was privy to all this information, why didn't she just tell us from the get-go? "Would you have believed me?" she replied. "If I'd caused a scene out on that road and told everybody that this was some messed up, dangerous place, would you have believed it? Or would you have thought I was psycho or paid to promote the place or something?" I thought about it for a while, and I wasn't really sure. I then asked her why she decided to come back herself. She said it was to try and find Anton. She didn't think he was dead, just trapped in here somewhere. She said she was going to get him out. She'd gotten as much information out of Dixie as possible and then went and did some research of her own. But she'd gone a lot deeper than Kijun had, managing to track down first-hand accounts of others who had entered and survived the place. Though a lot of it ended up being incoherent, their memories of the place being scattered, hazy, unconsciously repressed. But what she was able to conclude from all of it was that if you ever found yourself in here, you just had to keep going. Even when the desperation hits and you're terrified and things seem hopeless, you just keep going. Because eventually the place will let you go. But only after you've proved to it that it isn't going to be able to break you. It could take hours, maybe days, but you had no other option. She also mentioned that if anything seems even remotely dangerous in here, it most certainly is. She then told us that we needed to get moving, back up the stairs. We asked why up and not down. She said that's just what she'd read from the reports, something about how once you were in the basement, you were basically in hell and you were never getting out. It was a lot to take in and process, but we felt it best to just listen to her. So, we began moving back up the stairs. I think I'll stop it there for now. I still have a lot to tell you, but I've gotten a bit tired typing this all out. I'll update when I can. Alright, so definitely a backroom story. Also, I wonder if Sinclair, is this some type of messed up experiment where he works for the government or he's getting something out of it? Or is he legitimately trying to monopolize the backrooms? Is he trying to turn the backrooms into a haunted house? And I don't know if I'd trust this girl. She seems kind of sus. Old Nadia. Anyways, here is part 2. At some point while we were moving up the stairs, a dim red light began saturating the air, but it never got too bright, just enough for us to be able to make out each other's figures as we moved. I could feel Kijun tapping on my shoulder from behind. I was about to turn around when he told me not to. "Keep looking ahead," he whispered. "Don't look at it." "Look at what?" I whispered back. "There's something following us." "What do you mean?" "There's an extra person here." I looked up, counted the figures ahead of me. 3. Everybody was in front of me. The person behind me wasn't Kijun. There shouldn't have been anyone behind me at all. I could still hear them breathing. I told everyone that we needed to start running. Nadia didn't miss a beat and began bolting up the steps while the rest of us trailed close behind her. I'm not sure how long we ran for, but by the time that the stairs ended and gave way to another corridor, my legs had nothing left to give. We looked back down, waited for something to come charging up at us, but nothing ever did. So we walked on. Now it was back to the ceaseless maze of halls. It had looked fairly identical to the ones that had come before, besides the red glow, which had persisted up from the stairs. I asked Nadia what the red was supposed to mean. She told me she wasn't sure, that it hadn't come up in any of the reports she'd gone through. She then told me that there were hardly any similarities between the reports at all. Each experience had been unique. Some mentioned going through rooms the size of auditoriums, while others mentioned having to squeeze through tube-like spaces. There were also accounts of even stranger, more abstract areas. Things like a series of rooms floating in empty space, connected only by both horizontal and vertical ladders. Narrow walkways suspended over massive pools of black water. One even mentioned a room where they could see the stars and moon above, but they knew that they weren't even outside, because they could still see the walls. One of the few things that these reports had in common with each other was Sinclair. In each instance, he had been there, as far as the UK and as close as Mexico. All physical descriptions of him had been congruent with the man that we'd seen with our own eyes, though he'd apparently gone by a different name each time. I asked her what kind of info she was able to dig up on the guy. She shook her head and told me absolutely nothing at all. She knew that records about him existed, police and military reports, government files, but they were too classified for her to be able to access. She said that she'd tried getting the police involved. She found another flyer advertising the house a few weeks prior. She'd responded to it, and once she'd gotten an address, she marched down to the station and told them to investigate it. She told them about Anton, the building, all of the missing people. They'd simply told her that they'd look into it. And then they went radio silent. No follow-ups, nothing. She said it was almost like they were actively avoiding her. I then asked her how she was planning on finding her brother. Did she even know where to look? She told me that Dixie had given her just enough information to be motivated to try. That she wasn't necessarily confident, but it was worth a go, because she wouldn't be able to forgive herself otherwise. We continued on through the corridors until it opened up into a larger space. This one looked like the lobby in any old office building. Stale light, gray carpets, white walls, the faint smell of filtered air and old coffee. There was a couch and a few single chairs scattered in front of a receptionist desk. There was a bowl of some candy sitting on the desk, and as I stared at it, I realized how hungry I'd become. I wouldn't do it, Nadia told me. It's probably not candy. I decided to hold off on taking one. There were a set of doors to our right and an elevator to our left. We decided to go through the doors, opening them up to find an impossibly vast office space. Rows of cubicles, desks, water coolers that seemed to stretch on in perpetuity. It didn't seem so promising, so we went back into the lobby. Considered trying the elevator instead, but when we could hear a faint mechanical hum, the muffled straining of cables, we looked at the elevator and saw the up arrow illuminated above the doors. Something was headed up towards us. We weren't keen on finding out what it was, so we headed back towards the office space. As we were walking, we could hear a ding, the door sliding open behind us. We turned around and saw a figure marching towards us in the distance. Looked like an extremely tall man in a suit. Way too tall, his head nearly scraping the ceiling even though his back was heavily slouched. He had pale, clammy skin and long, greasy hair. As he got closer, we could make out this horrible expression of malice on his face. It was the way you'd look at somebody who you really wanted to hurt. We turned away, started moving faster, and he continued to follow us. Over time, we noticed that his speed always remained constant. He never slowed down, never sped up. We found that we were able to outpace him if we maintained a very light jog. But after everything we'd already been through, this wasn't exactly an easy thing to do. Eventually, our bodies would quit on us. No escaping that. The office stretched on and everything looked the same, but eventually we came across somebody sitting in one of the cubicles. It was a young woman in a dress shirt and dress pants. She was sat in front of the computer, furiously typing away at the keyboard despite the screen displaying nothing but an empty white light. We tried asking her what she was doing and who she was, but she didn't respond. She remained staring at the screen with her eyes glazed over, as if her consciousness existed entirely separate from us. But with the man getting closer, we couldn't afford to linger. We moved on, starting to see more and more people in the cubicles. There were dozens, maybe hundreds of them, all dressed in the same shirt and pants and all typing away with that same empty stare. We turned around, watching as the man moved past them without paying them any mind. We tried to ignore the implications of it. We upped our pace, but after a few more minutes, Nadia suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. Now she was staring intently into one of the cubicles. We caught up to her and found her staring at a boy that seemed to be no older than 16 or 17. We asked her who it was. She told us that it was one of her brother's friends. He'd gone into the building with him that day. He'd also disappeared. We walked into the cubicle and crouched down beside him. "Hey buddy, where's Anton?" she asked him. "Is he around here somewhere? Did you see where he went?" He didn't respond. "Where is he?" she repeated, now an edge in her voice. "When's the last time you saw him?" We had been standing still for too long, and the man was getting uncomfortably close. I told her that we needed to start moving again. She told me to give her a second and then grabbed the boy's shoulder. She began shaking him. "Hey," she shouted at him, "wake up. We need to find Anton. We need to get out of here." He wouldn't budge. She tried pulling him away, but he stopped typing and grabbed the desk, anchoring himself in place. His expression changed. Now he looked terrified, feverishly shaking his head while his eyes remained glued to the monitor. The man was now about 10 seconds away from reaching us, and I stressed this fact to her. Nadia cursed, slammed the table in frustration. She then backed out of the cubicle and we started running. The man had gotten so close to us that we could start to smell him. The best way I can describe the scent is a combination of ammonia and rotting fruit. We continued on, alternating between jogging and speed walking, but at this point, it was starting to feel like a losing battle. We were no closer to escaping the guy from when we started, and our bodies were feeling it. Knees aching, muscles heavy as lead, feet throbbing in our shoes. Soon, Josh had stopped moving. He caught his breath and shook his head. "Screw this," he said. "I'm done with this shit." "What do you mean?" I asked him. "I'm done with it," he repeated. "I'm not playing this stupid game anymore." Nadia told him that we needed to keep moving. He looked at her. "What did you say before? If you don't allow this place to break you, it'll set you free? Something like that?" "I just meant that we shouldn't give up," she said to him. "That as long as we move forward, we'll eventually escape." "It's fear, right?" he continued. "If we have no fear, then this place has no power over us." "No," Nadia told him. "No, it's not like that at all. This isn't going to end until we make it end." He turned around, began walking towards the man. We tried pulling him back, but he yanked himself free. "I'm not scared anymore," he told us. "I'm getting the hell out of here." He looked at the man as he approached. He raised his arms. "Come get me," he screamed at him. "I'm not scared of you. I'm not—" The man bent down, and his jaw unhinged what had to be several feet. He grabbed Josh by the waist and picked him up and then shoved him into his throat. I'm not sure how else to describe what happened. It was like there was a black hole waiting just beyond his mouth. Josh disappeared straight down into it. There was no struggle, and the man didn't even swallow. He just closed his mouth and continued on towards us. We ran again, and this time we didn't stop until we finally reached the other end of this incomprehensible space. Waiting for us in the wall was another elevator, and it was a sight for sore eyes. We only had the option to go down, and so we pressed the button, and then we waited. We had managed to create a good amount of distance between us and the man, so he was still a good ways away. But the elevator hadn't arrived, and he was only getting closer. We pressed the button again, as if it would help anything, and then again, and again. We looked around to see if we had missed a door, another elevator, a set of stairs, any kind of opening, but there was nothing. Eventually, the elevator did open up, and just in time. We rushed in there, and the doors closed right as the man was unhinging his jaw again. That rotting ammonia smell lingering in the cabin, and it was so strong I had to swallow back some bile. We could feel ourselves start to move down, and it was pitch black inside. "You guys still there?" Kijun asked. We told him that we were, and he seemed relieved. I felt around the walls, and it seemed like they were made of glass. After a while, the cabin suddenly filled up with a dim red light. It was a bit brighter than the light back in the corridors, but much more ominous once we realized the source of it. We appeared to be descending down towards a vast, sprawling metropolis. We could see skyscrapers of varying shapes and sizes all packed tight together, stretching out in every direction as far as we could see. It was hard to grasp the scale of the place. We must have been several miles up in the air, and yet there were still buildings around us that dwarfed us. The sky above was dark, and the only illumination came from the blood-red lights emanating from the windows in the buildings. And then we realized that there wasn't actually a sky at all. No stars, no moon, no clouds, just a black sheet. We looked down at the streets below and saw no cars, no people, no streetlights, not even any sidewalks. But then we looked further out in the distance and saw a lone figure shambling towards the base of the elevator. And then we saw another one, and then more and more. Soon they were appearing in waves, crowds of dark shapes closing in on us from every direction. We took a closer look and saw that some were crawling, others sprinting at full speed. Some appeared to be missing limbs, while others were much more bizarre in appearance. Some didn't seem human at all. It wasn't much longer before the streets below were completely filled, as if this were some kind of messed up parade. The figures continued to flood in, becoming packed so tightly together that they were now scrambling over top one another. Soon they'd started climbing up the buildings that surrounded us. The elevator began to descend slightly faster. Before long, we'd reached the bottom, which was something that all three of us came to an unspoken agreement absolutely could not happen. We looked around the cabin for a solution. There was nothing obvious at first, but we didn't panic. After dealing with this place for as long as we had, we'd become hardened in a way. I'm sure that if we had been in this situation earlier on, we would have shut down and given up. But now we knew this place had rules. Perhaps we didn't understand them, but it didn't seem likely that this elevator was meant to be a death sentence. Especially not after how far we'd come. "The wall behind us," I said. Since it was made out of glass, we could see the floors passing by. If we timed it right, we could jump onto one. I stepped back and kicked the glass as hard as I could, and I kept doing it. Soon the other two had joined in, and we kicked and kicked until it cracked, and we kept kicking until it shattered. At this point, we could start to hear pounding on the glass all around us. I could see movement at the edges of my vision, but I tried not to spare it any attention. We needed to focus. This was life or death. Kijun was the first to jump. We watched as he leapt forward and rolled onto one of the floors before immediately disappearing above us. I held my breath. Nadia reached out and grabbed my hand, and then we jumped together. I think we made it by less than an inch, landing hard on rough carpet. Seconds later, we heard the elevator crashing down onto the ground. We turned around, finding several dark figures pressed up against the glass outside the shaft. We stared at them, and although we couldn't make out any of their features, we could tell that they were staring right back at us. We were almost convinced that the moment we tried running away from them, they'd burst through the glass. But they never did. Eventually, they just disappeared, slowly retreating back down. We stood there for a while longer, until it felt safe enough to turn around. Once we did, we found yet another corridor ahead. But this time, we didn't have to walk for too long before we reached a door. We didn't immediately open it up. It could have been a trap. This could have been false hope, but bereft of any other option, we eventually took the chance and did so. Immediately, we were blinded by light. After our eyes had adjusted to it, we could see that it appeared to lead outside, into a forest. I walked out, breathed in the fresh air, and listened to the chirping of the birds. I then realized that this was the same clearing we'd first entered the building from. The same clearing that Sinclair had led us to. I turned around, and sure enough, the building was right there, the same way it looked when I'd first seen it. 3 stories tall, painted dark gray. I took another look around the forest. I felt the sun on my skin, watched the bugs crawling around the ground. We had finally made it out. It felt surreal. I almost wanted to collapse and start crying. I looked over at Nadia, who was still standing in the doorway. "We're out," I said to her. "We're free." She smiled, but she didn't move. She just remained standing there. "What's the matter?" I asked her. "Let's get the hell out of this forest." She shook her head. "My brother's still in there," she said. "I came for one reason. If I can't find him, then I'm not leaving." I didn't know how to respond to that. "I could use some help looking for him, you know," she continued. Her eyes were hopeful, almost pleading. "We made it out once. We could do it again after we find him." I thought about it for a while, and then I told her I couldn't do that. That I was sorry, but I just couldn't go back in there. "It's all right," she said to me. "I don't blame you. I just thought I'd ask." And with that, she turned around, walked back into the building. I remained watching her for a second, and then I got the hell out of that forest. Throughout that entire ordeal, I had managed not to lose my car keys, so I was able to drive away once I got back to the road. I contacted the police immediately after I got home. I gave the operator the coordinates from the email and then explained in every detail everything that had happened. I even offered to come back down there to guide the officers over to exactly where the building was. The operator thanked me for calling in and told me someone would follow up with me soon. This all happened weeks ago, and still, nobody's gotten back to me. I don't know how many times I've called in, asking for an update. I've even gone down to the station in person, but every time they just tell me the same thing. That somebody would be following up with me. It's like the universe is telling me to just drop it. that I should just be grateful that I even made it out of there, that I shouldn't be pushing my luck any further. But I don't know. That's a bit of a hard pill to swallow. Josh is gone. Nadia's still inside that place. Sinclair, or whatever the hell his name really is still out there. That building is still out there. I don't think I'm ready to let this go. Not yet. The fact that Nadia went back in to go look for her brother is crazy. Like, honestly, the fact that Nadia even asked, like, hey, we made it out once, we can get out again. Like, no, I'm sorry. You didn't find him the first time around. Your brother's friend was, like, locked in a cubicle and his, mind was broken or whatever. He was in a different plane of existence. Same thing probably happened to your brother. You probably just didn't see him sitting at a cubicle. Or maybe he got eaten by the black hole mouth guy. Did the OP even actually escape the back rooms? Or is this just all part of it still? Do you ever actually escape? Who knows? Anyways, that was another great story from Mr. Outlaw. All of his links are going to be down in the description, along with a link directly to the story. Huge shout out to my channel members. Thank you so much for your support. If you guys do want to further support the channel, that link's going to be down in the description. It is absolutely not necessary, but it is greatly appreciated. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, drop a like and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Peace.